Good day and welcome everyone. I'm your host, Mary Lee Gorham, Admissions and Marketing Director at Peabody Place, and this is our next show, Eldertyme, which is a wonderful informational show to discuss all things pertinent to living in New Hampshire in the Lakes region as a senior. Although this particular show will be a little different because we thought we'd take a step back in time and talk about the history of Franklin, the city of Franklin, the best and smallest city in the state. And I have two very interesting guests with me today who really are sort of the brain council of all the information, all that corporate memory about the city of Franklin.
That's an awful lot of weight to put on my shoulders.
So we have Lee Webb, and Lee is very well known. He has that fabulous voice as if he were in the actor's studio or something. But Lee is the current and reigning president of the Historical Society here in Franklin. But here at Peabody Home, Peabody Place, 2 degrees of separation is really all that does not connect each other. So everyone here has very close ties to the city, but also to Peabody Place. Lee is a board corporate member with us, and corporate members, one of the things that we ask corporate members to do is to be goodwill ambassadors to all things that Peabody actually does. So put those two things together of being president of the Historical Society and knowing the history of the city of Franklin and also being connected to Peabody, that's a really, really good connection. So welcome, Lee.
Well, thank you.
All right then. The eminent gentleman to my immediate left is John Benham.
And the face of Peabody Place.
John, where do we begin with John Benham? Certainly a local businessman, has been a part of the societal fabric of the city of Franklin for a really long time. He was board president here at Peabody Home. He really has been the person who has helped us move forward. And as you can probably see in the background here, our soon-to-be new home, he's chair of the building committee, a large job indeed. John and I work closely on the marketing committee, also to do with Peabody Place. He's a volunteer and just so interwoven also into our home here at Peabody. So welcome, John.
Well, thank you.
And John has a lot of information stored. We have lovely conversations about the history of Peabody. So without further ado, I thought we would jump in. And Lee, I'd like to start with you. If you'd like to give us a brief sort of overview of the Historical Society and what that mission is relative to recording all the information that folks should know about the city of Franklin.
The Historical Society has gone through several iterations based on what information I have directly is that there was an Historical Society created, and I don't think it lasted very long, in the 1930s.
Wow.
About the time that Alice Shepard was writing the first history of Franklin. In fact, we have minutes that we somehow acquired in our collection of that meeting where she was invited to speak in 1930 on her history. So I would guess that she started compiling all of that information just prior to that. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't privately published until 1996. So her history book, which was then inherited by her son, John Shepard Jr., was in the works for 66 years and was still, I would say, not really anywhere close to completion when it was finally published. It was published without an index. It was published without genealogical studies of the primary families of Franklin, which the Shepards wanted to put in the book. It would have been this thick had it been, and it would never have been published actually, probably. But the real duties of a historical society would be to compile and be a depository for information, create collections, do displays, but primarily with all of that information at their disposal to educate. Mm-hmm. And that is a mission I take very seriously. In fact, when I became involved with the Historical Society here in Franklin, there were probably 6 or 8 people that would meet on a regular basis and swap stories, and they usually met in the VFW, right next door here.
Yep.
So when I got involved, I started thinking of what they could do to expand. So I came up with some ideas in the first few months. And within a relatively short period of time, the then president quit. And they turned to me and they said, well, you've come to our meetings, you're a member now, and you have ideas, and you probably don't know any better, so why don't you be president?
And to which you
And I've been president pretty much ever since.
Nobody else wants the job.
Yeah, except for 2 years when Steve Foley stepped in and was president.
Right, yeah.
So as president, I wanted to make sure I took my responsibilities very seriously. And not being from Franklin, I was born and raised, I'm a flatlander. I was born and raised in Massachusetts and spent 37 years of my life after I graduated high school in Los Angeles, and that's where I worked. Once I retired, I realized I could come back to New England, because you can take the boy out of New England, but you never take the New England out of the boy. And living in Los Angeles, it was very difficult to be a Celtics fan.
I bet.
So I got a lot of grief over that. So I realized that I didn't have to live in Los Angeles once I retired, because my work was in Los Angeles, but once I didn't need to work. So we found this wonderful house in Franklin and moved here, got involved with the Historical Society and other things. And I figured I'd better learn a little bit about the history of Franklin. So I've been on a learning curve ever since 2004. And I have one of the most important duties that I determined the president to have was to find us a permanent home. And by just sheer happenstance, I got involved with the saving of the Webster Elms Farm property, which most people knew as the Sisters of Holy Cross. And before that was actually the New Hampshire Home for Orphans for almost 100 years, from 1871 until 1958. Anyway, we decided that that was property worth saving from development. Got involved and actually were successful in putting all of the farmland in conservation easement and the buildings and most of the building facades in preservation easement. They were then sold to Alex Ray, who created the Recovery Center, which was then, after some years, was taken over by Easter Seals. And during the process of Alex's tenure, he and I got to know each other because I had been the unofficial caretaker of those buildings when they were in transition. Got to know them more intimately than I think I ever wanted to, but was a source of information to Alex as he was rehabbing core buildings into the Recovery Center. So I got to know him, and I said to him, with all these buildings, you can't use them all, Alex, and the Historical Society would really love to have a permanent home. And after a lot of wheedling and cajoling, I got him to give us a 100-year lease on what I consider and may arguably be the most historic building in Franklin, and that
Which is perfect, isn't it? Then
it is, and that's what I thought. This was a marriage made in heaven.
That's right.
So we then acquired what we affectionately call the Webster Tay house, which half of the building, which is the two-story section, was built in 1795 by the brother-in-law of Daniel Webster, and the other addition, which is a three-story addition, was built in 1858 by Rufus Tay after it was sold to him by Daniel's son, Fletcher. We could go on. And this is, are we digressing yet officially?
We're okay.
Probably. Anyway. So we became the stewards of that property. It's still owned by now Easter Seals, but we do have a long-term lease, and I already paid the lease. It was for $3 as long as we maintain the building. So we've already put on a new roof, we've taken off the vinyl siding, we've repaired the outside, we're about to do some sill work. So we're taking our stewardship very seriously. Yes.
Yeah. And what I like about New Hampshire, obviously, two of us are not from around here, then are we?
It's not a New Hampshire accent.
Well, it is, but
well, yeah, it is now.
she's cultivating it now.
That's right.
Well, I'll tell you a thing about accents. I was born and raised in Massachusetts. I never really had much of a Massachusetts accent.
You don't roll that hard R. No, you don't.
That's right.
Yes.
And when I went to California to go to college, actually at UCLA, I was very cognizant of a couple of things they'd pick up on, like aunt instead of aunt. Mm-hmm. You're never going to get me to say my aunt. And my sister's name was Linda. But when I first went to California, it was Linder, which is very New England. So I consciously corrected it and sort of neutralized my accent. So that's why I don't really sound like I'm from New England.
I like the fact that from a historical perspective, if one comes to the lovely state of New Hampshire and you've lived here for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, but the house you may live in will still and always be referred to as the house of the original people. They live in the Tay house. You've never quite, it's a historical marker with those original founding people. And even though one owns this property, you know what I'm saying? You still are sort of a temporary resident almost because the history is so embedded in the culture here in New Hampshire.
Well, the unfortunate thing about that is that Albert Garnow in his book did the same thing, but Alice certainly did it in her history of Franklin, is that when they were describing a property, they would say, well, it's where so-and-so lives now. When they were writing the book in 1935, which is long gone. And so you'd have to actually do research to find out, wait a minute, what property did that person own so I can locate it today?
Right.
And in fact, if you go through a deed search at the Merrimack County Registry of Deeds, you go back into the old deeds and they would say, well, they'd say the bound or the marker at such and such a location next to this person's property who's been dead for 150 years. So it's like, how do you find a property today? It's very, very difficult.
And the interesting thing with John sitting around the table with us this morning is John has, since I'm sort of have acquired most of this knowledge in the last few years, the history of Peabody is so interwoven into the history of the city from the original mill owners, which Leigh just alluded to. And Shepherd is a name that we know well, isn't it? There were 3 founding farms.
Well, there were 4, and I'm going to read them because I want to make sure I have them right.
I'm not going about notes. This is your sheet, not me. So if I make a mistake, it's because of my poor memory, not.
We will not hold that against you.
Well, I didn't want. I just know that these names really tie into the history of Franklin, and when I read them, you'll understand what I'm saying. Anna Blodgett. These, I think, were all tied to local paper mills. I think their husbands ran them or whatever. Anyway, Anna Blodgett, Mary and Clara Rowell. So there's sisters there. And finally, Eliza Shepherd. All those names are good old Franklin names.
Well, they are. And Blodgett, of course, the Blodgett that I remember is, I think there was a Blodgett who was a former mayor. And was a lawyer before that.
Well, these ladies wanted to form a place, or we call it for 80 years, Peabody Home. It's now called Peabody Place. And it started out as a very modest building. We're sitting in it, actually. This is an 80-year-old building, which is the reason we have to move also. But to continue on, they wanted to start this as a place for Franklin residents or area residents, which they did, and it ran very successfully for 80 years. The problem is time caught up with the building. That's really what happened. We all love this building, and we don't want to see it go, yet it must. And that's what happened. There's no way we could save it. We don't have enough property to keep it and expand also. So it has to go, which is the reason it's being built in 2 separate stages. This isn't done often because, number one, it's a little more expensive and it's awkward. But we wanted to do it for 2 major reasons. Number one, our residents. We didn't want to toss them out, which is done sometimes, by the way. They're just put somewhere else. And our help, which is excellent. And we wanted to make sure that both of those groups were treated the way they should be. So Hence, it led us to the two-stage development. The one we're building now next door will hold everybody that we have easily, and it will also include all the facilities required. The kitchen, for example, it'll all be in that building. And at the end of this year, either the last week of this year or the first week of next year, one day everybody will move. That sounds dramatic, and it is, and it isn't, because it will all be ready for them, and it'll just simply be matter as much as moving from one room to another right here now. They will just be moved next door. Very quickly after that, probably within a week, this building will be demolished.
And there's some poignancy there when I talk to people. The Peabody was called the mansion on Central Street, which is Franklin's main street, and it really is an icon. We've got the federal facade on the front, it's brick.
Yep.
And people saying, really, you have to tear down the building? Yes, we do, but we're certainly going to maintain some of the history. And I'd like you to tell our viewers a bit about one of our favorite subjects, which is the Indian artifacts.
Ah, yes.
And, they look like two rather odd-shaped stones, which we've moved from the large maple out front. At least, the builders squished them. But these stones are really something, aren't they?
Yeah, it fits in with the philosophy of Peabody Place as we move forward now. We found in the demolition and upkeep of the building here two rather large stones with depressions, and it's obvious that they are grinding stones, probably from the Native Americans who used this property, by the way, long before any recorded history was here. They used it for centuries because of the way the river comes in. This and what we now know as Odell Park were very popular spots for the Native American people. And so we have these two grinding stones. Well, what to do with them? Well, obviously, we very carefully kept them. You'll see them out beside our entry door now. They're sitting there waiting for the next move, which is very soon, within a month or two, we will build in our memory garden. The memory garden, by the way, is a garden probably 30 by 50 feet, which is totally enclosed by building, yet open to the sky. And so anybody in the whole building can go there and sit on benches and be treated.
So it's a courtyard?
It really is what it is. It's
Yes.
a courtyard. In the middle of this courtyard, we're going to be building, within a couple of months, a waterfall. And it'll probably be 8 or 9 feet tall, and it'll fall down. And into that will be built the two stones, the two grinding stones, and they'll be identified as to what they are and where they came from.
You see they're bowl-shaped?
They are.
So this is very similar to the rock that's up at the mortar lot.
Yes, only quite a bit smaller, yes.
Yeah, okay.
That is going to be built into our memory garden, flume, if you want to call it that. That will be lighted at night. There will be piped-in music if you want, and so anybody, anytime, can wander in there and sit, relax, do whatever. So we're very aware of what we have here, and we're trying to keep it intact and in use.
Well, you're asking me about the historical implications and the tie-in with the city,
Sure.
of course. You're called Peabody Place. Where did the name Peabody come from? But from Kendall and James Peabody,
Yes.
who were the creators of the very first paper mill here.
Wow.
This whole area was at one time called
It was
Paper Mill
bustling.
Village,
Yes, it
then
was.
Paper Mill Square.
Wow.
It's gone through several name changes, but it's all related to the industry that was the purpose of the creation of Franklin. As I'm thumping on the table, and I shouldn't do that. Sorry
It's
about
okay.
that. Yeah, it's for emphasis. Anyway, because Kendall Peabody, along with a partner, Robert Crane, created the very first paper mill here prior to Franklin even becoming a town.
Now, see, I don't know whether this property where we are right now was where the mill itself was, or
No.
where the residents were?
No, it's where the residents were.
And although he was long gone, everybody knew it as the Peabody Place.
Yes.
And that happens in New England. And
So
this-
that's where they built their homes initially, somewhere in this area.
So that's hence the name Peabody Place now and going forward.
Right.
Sure.
But that's the tie-in, is the fact is that Franklin would not exist
Without the Peabodys.
without the Peabodys and without the mills and the center of industry that it ultimately became because of the rivers.
I want to just butt in for a minute. And you've been there, if you go into our new addition and can get in there in some sort of a tour, if you look to the north, basically, you see Odell Park all the way 180 degrees. It's a beautiful, beautiful sight. I never thought it would be that nice. But if you look to the south, you see, starting at the library, which is a Carnegie Library, all the way around, you see old paper mill buildings, which are now residences.
No,
You
it's
see
textile
the-
mills. Soloway was a textile.
That particular one was,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
But you see the dam, and you see where the paper mills were. The bulk of them were along
Right,
there.
right.
If you're looking south, you're looking basically at the history of Franklin.
Oh, yeah.
You really are. And that's beautiful too. You wouldn't think it, but it is. It's quite nice. So we have a lock on good views here at Peabody Place.
You asked what the purpose of an historical society is, and I said primarily education, but it's more instilling in people what came first.
Absolutely.
And appreciating
Honoring the
why
values.
they are who they are today.
Definitely.
And that's one of the reasons it's so important to us after 80 years that we continue with the tradition that we built up and I want to say more than that, but the fact is we have a good reputation. We want to keep that. We want to keep it named Peabody because that's where we are. We're on Proctor Point, which is down there. We also own that. It's very important that this all ties together, and we enjoy the reputation that we have, and we actually improve it.
In fact, because you own the Proctor property and the fact that the Proctor family discovered so many of these other Indian
Oh,
artifacts.
did they ever?
Again, putting a focus on what came before and making people understand the importance of that.
Also, but also the thread that connects us to now.
Yes,
in the
absolutely.
future. That's when we bought that property over there, and before we had to demolish it. If you got up into the third floor, there was a whole room. There was a room. You've seen that.
I took pictures of it, John.
A room with glass cases, and
Are you talking about the Gambrel style, the Proctor Point house?
Yes.
Yes.
And all the Indian artifacts were gone at that time, but you could see in the dust where they were. It was very interesting.
Yes.
wasn't it?
Well, they had built these display cases specifically for the artifacts, most of which had been found at Odell Park.
Yes.
So are they in the Smithsonian now?
No, they are in the Hood.
Dartmouth.
They are in the Hood Museum at Dartmouth.
Oh, that's worth the
Whenever and I don't know the exact history, but the Proctor family was looking for a permanent home, and no one in Franklin seemed to have the
Didn't really know
space
what to
to
do.
accommodate.
Yep.
So they ended up at Dartmouth. But at least they're in a good place, and
Sure.
they are open to public display and research.
Yes. they are.
So, I mean, we're very aware. Boy, this is part one of the historical show because we've only scratched the surface. But it's really important to honor what came before, as Leigh said, to really look at the buildings. We've got such a revitalization going on at the moment. There are some absolutely fabulous buildings in Franklin,
Yes.
both private properties on what I call the high side, the other side, because we're on the low end where the river is. But if you take a drive, and that's a homework assignment for our viewers today, come and take a drive through Franklin and just look up at these beautiful brick buildings that have been refurbished. That's ongoing at the moment. Beautiful property inside. It's really, really changing. So wow, we could just talk. We haven't even begun. Lee,
That's right. I told you I can digress with the best of them. You know?
One of the things a good place to start is right exactly where we are.
Sure.
In this room is an 80-year-old room, and it has to go. But for the last 6 years, the boards have been meeting here in this room and made all the major decisions that lead to our expansions. We're right here in front of this. This is us.
Are you, I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
Are you photographically recording this building so you have at least...
That's a great question to finish with. Yes,
because
we are.
this is there should be pictures of this room. There should be pictures of the guest rooms and showing why there was a need to expand.
Exactly.
But also creating a record of what was here before, because I think that's important.
And in our new building, as we're almost out of time, surprisingly enough, gentlemen,
it's just flown by.
It really has. So we will be revisiting History of Franklin Part 2. We will actually have a display in Peabody Place that actually folks can come in and look at.
Yes.
That Lee, I know you're involved in that, of actually recording the history of Peabody. Will be in photographic display in our new building, which will be really lovely when we have our big opening. I'm hoping that we'll be able to do some art shows going forward. John and I have talked about this also, of having some photographic displays on show, showing this month at Peabody Place. History of Franklin, whatever that might be.
Well, the Historical Society has already contributed somewhat to that process.
Yes.
And finding some of the wonderful old photographs of what was here before, like the Sulloway Mansion.
That's right.
Like the original Proctor House and then the replacement Proctor House, because I believe the first Proctor House that was on the Point burned in 1900. And it was replaced by a second one. And that's the one, unfortunately, that was left derelict and was finally had to be destroyed.
So, gentlemen, we've come to the end of our show. Obviously, we...
So soon! I was prepared to go on for hours.
Well, let's do phase 2. Just keep rolling.
We will definitely revisit the history of Franklin. There's really a lot to talk about. We've talked about the paper mills, but also the textile mills. There are a number of mill towns in New Hampshire, as folks know, Manchester, Laconia. But Franklin really is really something to look at. Those that forget their history are doomed to repeat it, as so says. I forget who said that.
But it was George Santayana in 1905.
Which doesn't really fit for buildings, but the point is maintain what you have, honor the old architecture, but also embed it with the new.
To repeat what you said also, we're attempting to complete the work that these 4 ladies wanted us to do 80 years ago.
It's not just continuing the work, it's building
Actually, work. That's right. Thank you.
Did you notice there was a little pun there?
So, Lee and John, thank you so much. We will definitely do a second and maybe a third show. Eldertyme, very busy today. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.